this office undertakes its role in supporting the instruments of communion. I look forward to working closely with the Most Reverend Paul Kwong in his capacity as Chair of the Anglican Consultative Council. It has been a huge pleasure working for the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Most Reverend and Right Honourable Justin Welby, as his advisor on Anglican Communion affairs. As Secretary General from the 1st of September, I will continue to work with him in his capacity as an instrument of unity in the Anglican Communion and as President of the Anglican Consultative Council. I look forward to taking on my role at the beginning of September and work alongside the team at the ACO here in preparing for ACC 18, because one of the things I will be focusing on from September is to support the instruments of the Anglican Communion as they implement the outcomes of the 2022 Lambeth Conference. Please pray for me as I take on this role in leading the ACO team so that the Anglican Communion family will continue in its role of being God's church for God's world in such a time as this. Thank you.
Gavin, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
They can't hear us.
All right.
At all, or is it just very quiet?
Can you hear us at all?
Do we know that anything's actually happening? Or just it may just be they haven't started yet, might it? I don't know. Is anybody... Shall I go and get his phone number? And give
Is the microphone switched on? They look like
Hello, can you hear us now? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear now.
Oh.
With apologies, we're going to repeat that. So that's why you were all looking blank at me when I was giving you the instructions as to what was going to happen. Let's rewind.
Okay, right, okay.
The dress rehearsal went well. I'm delighted to announce that Bishop Anthony Pogo is the next Secretary General of the Anglican Communion. I should just say Archbishop Josiah Ido-Ofiran is not here, not for any dislike of the next Secretary General, but because he's on his way to Mozambique. The newest province of the Anglican Communion is the Portuguese-speaking Igreja Anglicana de Moçambique, Angola, and he's on his way there to do a retreat for their new bishops before their consecration. So that's why he's not here. So Bishop Anthony is here. He's going to say a few words, and then we'll throw it open to questions. When we questions for those on Zoom, if you could use the raise hand option on Zoom, or alternatively wave frantically, and we will see you there. And apologies for the people watching on YouTube, but here we go with take two.
Good afternoon, good morning. It is a huge privilege to be appointed as the next Secretary General of the Anglican Communion, taking over from the Most Reverend Dr. Josiah Ido-Ofiran. He is a big shoes to fill. I would like to thank the ACC Standing Committee for the trust and confidence in appointing me to lead the staff team at the Anglican Communion Office, as this office undertakes its role in supporting the instruments of communion. I look forward to working closely with the Most Reverend Paul Kwong in his capacity as the Chair of the Anglican Consultative Council. It has been a pleasure working for the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Most Reverend and Right Honourable Justin Welby, as his advisor on Anglican Communion affairs. As Secretary General, I'll continue to work with him in his capacity as an instrument of unity in the Anglican Communion and also as the President of the Anglican Consultative Council. I look forward to taking on my role at the beginning of September and work alongside the team here at the ACO in preparing for ACC 18. One of the things I will be focusing on from September is to support the instruments of the Anglican Communion as they implement the outcomes of the 2022 Lambeth Conference. Please pray for me as I take on this role in leading the ACO team so that the Anglican Communion family will continue in its role of being God's church for God's world in such a time as this. Thank you.
We're going to throw it open to questions now. When we have a question, I'm going to repeat your question, simply so that the people watching on YouTube can hear that. The microphone that we have for YouTube won't pick up your comments. I'm looking at the screen to see any hands raised. Okay, so I'll go in the room to Isabel.
Hello, Isabel from the Press Association. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Bishop Anthony, I wanted to know your thoughts on on the government's plans surrounding sending migrants and refugees and also sort of people such as yourself who've probably faced the same experiences you have to Rwanda, and what your thoughts are on that.
So that was a question for the YouTube viewers about Bishop Anthony's reaction to the UK government's plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda.
In this role, as Secretary General, I believe that it would not be appropriate for me to be commenting on matters that are very specific to provinces. However, it would be fair for me to say, as a person who was a refugee, to give an example, a personal example, that if in 1964, arriving at the Ugandan border, my family was to be asked to perhaps be transported thousands of miles away, say to Egypt, it would have been difficult, as it would have meant that, if we were in Egypt after several years, 9 years, it would have been harder for us to come back to South Sudan. That would really be my comment in answer to your question.
Okay, do we have any more questions? No. Any on Zoom? Rosie.
Following up from that, Bishop, I wonder how much you think your experience as a refugee, but also the fact that you were appointed with that experience, whether that says something about the direction of concerns that you want the Anglican Communion to be involved with. I mean, I suppose I'm asking how far you think the issue of refugees is one which should be very high up the agenda of the Anglican Communion.
For the people on Zoom, the question was about whether the appointment of Bishop Anthony suggests that the issue of refugees should be high on the agenda for the Anglican Communion.
Well, it is. I think most parts of the Anglican Communion are experiencing some form of conflict, and so the issue of reconciliation, working hard for peace, is of paramount importance. I know of provinces, primates and archbishops who are working very, very hard to bring peace in their various areas. As we speak, I can think of the eastern part of Congo, where there's an ongoing conflict, South Sudan, where I come from, with many people, across the border. And so, yes, working for peace is an important aspect. So when we work for peace, it then means that you can then prevent, more people being forced out of the areas of origin in order to live either internally as internally displaced persons or crossing the border as refugees. So yes, working for peace, reconciliation of paramount importance in my view.
Okay, Rosie, any further from you?
Not at the moment, there might be.
Okay, that's fine. I'm looking for more hands. Peter Owen from Thinking Anglicans.
Good afternoon, Bishop. How do you see the Anglican Communion developing itself over the next, say, 10 years?
And again, to repeat the question for YouTube viewers, the question was how does Bishop Anthony see the Anglican Communion developing over the next 10 years?
Well, the Anglican Communion family is a family that is scattered in various parts of the country, or various parts of the world, 165 countries. And most of what we do happens at grassroots. And so it's important to encourage. Now, the Anglican Communion Office doesn't have the authority to send instructions to various provinces. Every province of the Anglican Communion is autonomous and independent. Our role is to help, build relationships, encourage relationships. So yes, that is an important aspect of what we do. When bishops come to the Lambeth Conference, they will be sharing experiences, and we hope that during the time they are at the Lambeth Conference, they will also build relationships, and when they go back, many of this will carry on. I think another important aspect of the Lambeth Conference, out of the Lambeth Conference, I remember when I attended in 2008, I was able to link up with other bishops, and that continued even after the Lambeth Conference. And companion links are some of the things that we are encouraging, as a communion. And I believe that that's the part that we play as an office.
Okay, Ed Thornton, Church Times.
Thank you. Congratulations, Bishop Anthony, on your appointment. You say in the press release that one of the things you'll be focusing on when you start in September is supporting the instruments of the communion as they implement the outcomes of the Lambeth Conference. I was wondering if you could say a bit about what you think that implementation process will look like, especially in light of the Archbishop of Canterbury's recent announcement that the conference won't be passing resolutions, but rather Lambeth calls. Will that make a difference to the way in which decisions or statements of the Lambeth Conference are implemented?
So that was a question about implementation of the outcomes of the Lambeth Conference with the move for Lambeth calls rather than resolutions. It's
important to say that the Lambeth Conference is not a synod, so it does not have the authority to come up with a resolution that they will then say you need to, as provinces, implement this. Often what happens is that bishops would meet, they will go back to the different provinces, and where issues have been discussed, they will then discuss the various structures so that they then begin to implement that. Now, that does not mean that whatever happens at the Lambeth Conference is of no value. Yes, it influences, it can go down to the local level, to the diocesan level and provincial level. When bishops, after the Lambeth Conference, they will go back and implement and begin to look at some of the things. Now, the Archbishop has outlined, the calls that will happen, and the way my understanding of that is that these are calls where the church is being called to undertake A, B, C, D. If it comes to details of this, I understand there will be a press conference in I think next week when we will now look at the details of that. But from our perspective, our role as the Anglican Communion Office is to support the instruments of the communion, the ACC, as and when some of these things come at the various levels for us to undertake.
Okay, Tola and Bakwe from Premier Radio.
Thank you, Gavin. Congratulations again, Bishop Anthony. My question is what do you think is going to be the most difficult issue to navigate in your new role?
A question about the most difficult issue Bishop Anthony will have to navigate in his new role.
Well, two things that come to mind. The question of Anglican identity, defining, who is an Anglican. I think there are those who have concerns on the way that at the moment is, defined. But also the issue of human sexuality is another, matter that I believe is another matter of significance that I can mention.
Okay. Michael from Living Church.
I understand, Bishop Pogo, from your own personal experience and in your ministry as Bishop of Kajokeji, that you have spent a lot of time in Uganda, and the Church of Uganda is one of those provinces of the communion that is standing apart from the rest and not fully participating in the life of the instruments of communion. And I'm wondering if you have hopes of being able to build bridges with the Church of Uganda and the other provinces in that situation because of your own experience.
So the question for YouTube viewers was about whether Bishop Anthony's experience in Uganda will enable him to reach out to that province and others that are declining to attend, participate in the instruments of communion.
in my current role, I know that the Archbishop and other instruments have been open and provinces that are not currently involved in participating in the different meetings and structures of the communion. And I would definitely do what I can to encourage participation. We are a family, and as a family, we do what we can for members of the family who, for one reason or another, the moment do not feel that they should be participating in aspects of the family, and I would do what I can to encourage that. Of course, I can't promise that this is what I will do, but definitely yes, I would use whatever it takes to ensure that we are together as a family. Within the family, there are disagreements, and these disagreements should not make us, leave being part of that family.
Mark, you have it muted. Do you have a follow-on? Mark, do you have a follow-on question? You've not muted.
I do have a follow-on question, if it's all right, but it's slightly different. I understand that the number of staff working at the ACO office has been significantly reduced over the past several years. And I wonder if Bishop Pogo has thoughts about the ability of the staff to accomplish the necessary work given that reduction in numbers.
So for the YouTube viewers, the question was whether the reduction in staff at the ACO will enable the work to continue. Just on a, if I can answer that one to start with, because Bishop Anthony won't have all the details about staffing going procedure. There hasn't been a significant reduction in staffing here. There's been a reorganisation of the staffing, and there's been a change in the leadership structure and a change in some of the roles. But the overall staffing numbers is roughly now on a par with what it was 4 or 5 years ago. But the general question about the capacity of the ACO to deliver the outcomes of the Lambeth Conference and the other instruments, I don't know whether you want to address that.
Well, my appointment has just been announced. I haven't had a chance to look at details of staffing levels. It will be too early for me to make a significant comment on that. But I think it's important to say that I am aware of the ACO review and which took place last year. And so, in 2020, I believe. I would definitely not expect to make any major changes, but we'll study that very, very carefully, work with the staff team in order to look at what would be the right level of staffing that we have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Rosie Dawson, Religion and News Service.
Thank you, Religion Media Centre.
Sorry, apologies.
I've not yet crossed the pond. I was struck, Bishop, by your answer to Tola's question about the most difficult issues, and I wonder if you could say a little bit more about both of those. The first one was about the question of Anglican identity, and I wonder what the hallmarks of Anglican identity are, which you feel are contested. And the second one about the issue of human sexuality and what it is, your own experience and perspective on this issue, which will determine your approach to trying to sort of deal with divisions on that issue.
Okay, for the YouTube viewers, I keep saying for the YouTube viewers because I don't want people joining late to think I'm translating English into English. The question was for Bishop Anthony to give more details on the issues that he mentioned earlier, Anglican identity and human sexuality as issues facing the communion.
The reason I refer to Anglican identity is because I know there have been one or two places where it's been a concern has been raised on the fact that to be an Anglican you have to be in communion with the See of Canterbury. Others have said that's not appropriate. Now I think that's why I said the issue of identity is an issue that I know would keep coming up. On the issue of human sexuality, I have been part of a group called Bishops in Dialogue before I took on my role, and I went to I believe 7 or 8 of the Bishop of Dialogue consultations, and some of the things that we were looking into during the consultations were ways in which we can discuss among ourselves issues where we may not be in agreement, but find ways in which we can understand each other's context. And I think that's really is important in my view. So understanding each other's context is an important part of resolving some of the issues that we have in the communion. And it's not persuading you to change your views, but actually having an understanding of your context. And so yes, so taking on from my experience in the Bishops in Dialogue consultations, these are important matters, but it's important that we have the relevant dialogue so that we can continue to have conversations.
Can I just ask a follow-up question from the first one, if I may, which is whether you have any views on the proposal from within the Church of England that there should be a change to the number of representatives from the ACC involved in the appointment of the Archbishop of Canterbury, to give the communion a larger say in who should be the Archbishop of Canterbury.
So this was a question about whether Bishop Anthony has views on the Church of England's proposals to possibly change the way Archbishops of Canterbury are chosen, with a greater involvement from the wider Anglican Communion.
I'm afraid I would not want to say what my views are on that particular one, especially taking on its role, and also the fact that I have been on the Archbishops. I'm still on the Archbishops team, so I would keep that to myself, please.
Okay, back to Ed Thornton at the Church Times.
Your predecessor, Dr. Josiah Ido-Fearon, told on the Church Times last year that while divisions remain in the communion over issues that have just been talked about, he said, quote, "there is very little of the bitterness and rancour that existed previously." Just wondered if that had been your observation over the last sort of, decade. And just following on from that, your thoughts on the influence of groups such as GAFCON, which seem to be moving away from being aligned with Canterbury and forging their own kind of Anglican identity.
So that was a question about whether Bishop Anthony shares Archbishop Ido-Fearon's view that while disagreements remain, there's less rancour and bitterness in the communion, and also Bishop Anthony's view on GAFCON and moves by some to move away from the structures of the communion.
I would agree that I think we've moved on. I can see, at least in the last 5 years, that there's huge differences, and there's a huge change in the way meetings have happened. Primate meetings have happened, have occurred. On GAFCON, let me perhaps refer to a conversation I had with one of the primates. One of the primates said, if GAFCON is for fellowship, for people who would want to have time of fellowship on groups of people who think alongside the same lines on what is of course referred to as orthodoxy, then they are for it. However, if GAFCON is seen as an alternative to the communion, then they are not for it. And I think there are a number of primates across the communion in the global south who would agree with this particular primate, and that's really what I can say in answer to your question.
I can see no more hands, so if we are done, thank you all very much. There will be photographs available. There was a Dropbox link in the press release that was sent to you shortly before this press conference, and we'll drop some photos in there very, very soon. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.